Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. We're going to start off today's show by discussing U.S.-Iran relations. Now, Joe Biden came into office promising that he wanted to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, but he's recently appointed Richard Nephew as his deputy Iran envoy. Now, Nephew has an interesting past in a book that he's written not too long ago. He used to be, of course, the deputy coordinator of the sanctions policy under Obama as well. And Nephew has taken personal credit for depriving Iranians of food, sabotaging the Iranian automobile industry, which, as we know, is quite large, and driving out unemployment within Iran, especially, of course, amongst the youth, which seemingly were the target of such sanctions altogether. He's also described the destruction of Iran's economy as a quote-unquote tremendous success. Does then his appointment mean that Biden isn't actually going to try to re-enter the deal and it isn't going to be as reconciliatory with Iran as we may all have thought? Or are we possibly overstating Nephew's role altogether in what any policy making by the Biden administration will be? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. And I join Mostapha Khoshcheshm, who is a senior Iran affairs analyst. He's joining us today from the Iranian capital, Tehran. And joining us from Guildford in the UK is Ellis, Mallett, who is a doctoral researcher in international relations at the University of Surrey. Ellis and Mostapha, thank you both for taking our time out for joining us today. Ellis, let me start with you. Richard Nephew doesn't sound like the kind of guy who is going to be very reconciliatory with Iran, especially when it comes to the Iranian demand of lifting sanctions, as was, of course, agreed upon within the JCPOA. What do you make of him?
I mean, I think in the first instance, what we'll see is, and what we have seen is rhetoric around both. I think Biden will eventually return to the JCPOA, but exactly what that process might take remains to be seen. Now, the appointment of Richard Nephew to Deputy Envoy on Iran is perhaps concerning for some people for the obvious reasons, such as those that you've already pointed out. And while Nephew has previously shown some concern around Washington's fondness of using sanctions as a foreign policy tool, I think that was merely in the context that they would come back to harm the United States. You know, he was a firm believer that the sanctions program under Obama was the key element in bringing Iran to the negotiating table. And I think in that context, we will see, you know, very much the same line of thinking again. In that, I think the administration will try to use these sanctions in what they believe to be some kind of leverage in trying to force Iran back into compliance with the nuclear deal in exchange for sanctions relief and in exchange for the United States, you know, coming back into the JCPOA. And that was recently echoed by the Deputy Treasury Secretary, Wally Adeyemo. So while I think we can hope for a return to the JCPOA at some point, and I do think that that will come into fruition, I don't think we've necessarily seen the end to the sanctions program.
Mostapha Khoshcheshm, what do you make of that? I mean, sanctions being lifted seems to be, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the very basic first step that has been asked for by pretty much every Iranian official.
Hello, and thanks for having me. Yes, that's true. All throughout the past 2 decades, there have been agreements between Iran and the United States and the 3 European nations. In the words of Western officials as well as experts, Iran has always been in compliance with the deals it has struck with the West. But because it has always been looking for a conflict resolution, and it has been convinced that the other side is looking for a conflict resolution. But the Western states, including especially the United States, they've never been loyal to deals because they have never been looking for a conflict resolution. They've been looking for containing Iran's power. And in this war and in this containment strategy, sanctions and the sanctions policy plays a very important and vital role because it bears actually the half of the burden for pressuring Iran, and considering that the plan and this containment strategy is not confined to Iran's nuclear program, but they want Iran's missile industry, they want Iran's regional power to be confined, and so on and so forth. So they may not remove the sanctions. In all the past 2 decades, all throughout the past 2 decades, in all these agreements, Iran has always demanded the removal of the sanctions, and it's been promised by the Western states that they would do so, but they have never done that. They have defied it one way or another, either like Obama, when he signed the JCPOA, he was the first violator. We do remember that ISA was reimposed under Obama. The visa waiver program was changed under Obama in violation of the nuclear deal because he signed the decree, the executive orders in order to remove the sanctions, but they never did that in practice. But under Biden, they know that Tehran now knows the game. So they have worked out a mechanism called the FSW rule, fortifying sanctions wall. This was done by Donald Trump after he exited the nuclear deal. And they mean to keep the sanctions in place in order to push Tehran. And by the way, maybe in the next question, I would refer to this Richard Nephew acknowledgement, which is nothing new, actually. It has already been acknowledged by other sanctions experts and officials in the United States.
Very well, Ellis. There you've heard the point of view from Iran. And as you can imagine, Ellis, the appointment of Richard Nephew has not gone down well in Iran. And I was just looking at some Persian headlines about that, and none of them are very, positive and optimistic about what this means then going forward, right? That then becomes and remains the main issue, doesn't it, Ellis? The lifting of sanctions. I don't want to repeat the same question I put to you first, but are you confident that sanctions can even be lifted by the Biden administration? I mean, does Biden even have that sort of political courage and power?
It's a really complicated issue, and it's a great question. And sanctions have long been a really key component of the US foreign policy toolkit. And, at the end of the day, the appointment really shouldn't come as a surprise. It's the same old Washington playbook that has been around for decades. The United States and its foreign policy bureaucracy, it assumes it has an exceptional right to dictate the internal and external actions of others through the implementation of inhumane sanctions regimes and coercive diplomacy. And what's most concerning, I think, is that the United States might be able to afford to wait on prioritising the Iran deal in favour of seeing to domestic issues such as the economy and tackling the coronavirus pandemic. But the sanctions regime remains in place and continues to hurt the lives of millions of Iranian citizens. And I don't necessarily dispute that Nephew will provide solid expertise on the Iran issue, but the appointment does little to encourage the formulation of a policy that addresses the strategic reality that Iran presents. At the end of the day, a hostile policy involving sanctions and further delays in returning to the JCPOA continues to fail to serve US interests. So, I'm not sure the question of whether Nephew signals a dilemma between the JCPOA or economic sanctions is the right one. But what I do think is that his appointment signals a business as usual approach that we've seen many times before.
Okay, so Mostapha Khoshcheshm, let's put this into context for our viewers. I mean, Nephew in his book talks about, access to food, the automobile industry, unemployment. We know that, of course, access to medicines has been very, very tough as well in these years, especially medicines which are more unique for more rare diseases. And of course, the Iranians to a fairly large extent have been able to, internally, domestically produce certain medicines. But of course, there's always that challenge with rarer diseases. What kind of an impact, if you can put this into context for our viewers, have these sanctions really had on everyday life for Iranians?
It is no secret that the sanctions have made life difficult for normal, average citizens, but they have failed to obtain the result they have been designed for. As a matter of fact, sanctions, alongside posing credible military threat, are meant to work on the decision makers in Tehran to change their calculations by increasing the cost and pushing them to talks. For this to happen, in the words of Obama, as well as Richard Nephew, the sanctions could reach their peak, the climax of pressures, in about 1.5 years to 2 years after they are imposed. Once we are at the end of this 2-year-long time, if Iran has not given in to the U.S. demands, then it will not, even in the words of Obama and Richard Nephew, because the peak is 1.5 years to 2 years after they are imposed. Now, we are 2.5 years after these sanctions were imposed by Donald Trump, the 2-year-long period that's called the maximum efficiency period, ended in May. And ever since then, we could see that Iran, based on Reuters as well as tankers trackers and other Western media outlets and tracking institutions, Iran has been increasing its oil exports from a couple of 100,000 barrels per day to 1 million in summer and 1.5 million in October. Also, since this May, Iran has been increasingly selling petrol to Venezuela and a number of other countries, and it has set a record of, a record in selling oil products, and Iranian economy is picking up. Despite this coronavirus, Iranian economy is showing positive growth. And according to IMF, as well as Iranian Central Bank and many other Iranian institutions and economic centers, next Iranian years that would start in a couple of weeks from now, Iran would register a positive growth. So basically speaking, in technical terms, the sanctions have failed to produce the desired results that's pushing Tehran to talks based on what the United States desires.
We were speaking there to Ellis Mallett, speaking to us from the UK, and Mostapha Khoshcheshm, who was speaking to us from the Iranian capital, Tehran, discussing there the appointment of Richard Nephew as the U.S. Deputy Iran Envoy. This, of course, an appointment by Joe Biden, who came into office saying that, hey, we're going to re-enter the JCPOA. He was quite confident about that, but I imagine he's found that it's a lot tougher than he probably had calculated, or maybe he wasn't really meaning to do it, and it was all just rhetoric altogether, because a person like Nephew, who has the kinds of views that he has regarding sanctions, it doesn't give one much confidence that he's really even cares about the Iranian people and what they're going to be suffering under these sanctions, regardless of what your opinion about the Iranian government and governing system may be. At the end of the day, as we know, it is people who suffer, and for you to celebrate the suffering of people is probably quite an odd thing and an unacceptable thing to be doing, regardless, as I said, of your desire for regime change, your concerns about human rights, your concerns about regional activities, et cetera, all of those on one side, but then the suffering of people, innocent people who have no role in the middle of these geopolitical concerns on both sides, and of course their adversarial relationship. I'll leave it there for now. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to once again discuss France and Islamophobia within that country, as we have many, many times during this show in previous episodes. We're going to hone in on a letter which 25 global NGOs, this is NGOs from 11 different countries around the world, have jointly written to the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, asking for her to put France in front of the European Court of Justice to be properly investigated for what the signatories have called state-sponsored Islamophobia, which is, of course, quite a serious accusation. Now, certainly, if you look at all the current policies, this entire Republican charter of values that has been put in front of the French Parliament and that has already been now approved, issues like separatism, Islamo-leftism in universities, I mean, the rhetoric that is being used about Muslims is increasingly rhetorical and, if we're completely honest, hateful, really. Let's discuss those issues a bit further. We're now joined by Monia Bouguerra, who is a member of the political party, the Union of French Muslim Democrats. She's joining us today from Lyon. And joining us today from Paris is Kourosh Shamlou, who is an attorney at law and is an international relations expert as well. Kourosh and Monia, thank you both for taking your time out to join us today. Monia, let me start with you. What do you make of the letter? This is quite a step up, right? Do you think that the European Union will get involved?
Well, the Muslim community hopes that they will be heard and they will be supported around the world. Among the European community, the letter written by those 25 NGOs was obviously, of course, for us, a good news. Here in France, the Muslim community is being supported as well by the Christian community, which is pretty new. They are worried, just as we are, about Islamophobia. This new law about separatism is stigmatizing the Muslims, and it's actually giving it's actually giving an argument for terrorists to how shall I say, to convince people that there is a problem between Islam and the Western world. Just some people talk about a war of civilization as if we were opposed, as if we were enemies, the enemies within. So definitely this law about separatism is dangerous, and we are fighting against it.
What are your thoughts about this? I'm sure you've been observing what's been happening in France for a while now. The direction that the country is moving in when it comes to its relations with its own Muslim citizens is not positive, is it?
Thanks for having me on. Let me put first maybe some perspective in this thing. As you said, I'm a lawyer, and in France, what the viewers should understand is that France, it's a laic country, which means that the country is separated from religion. And if you have two laws, you have to choose between the law of the religion and the law of the country. The law of the country, we have the freedom of speech, we have the freedom of opinion, we have the freedom of religion, of course. But what France is saying is that you cannot in no way show your religion outside in public administration. In outside, you can wear scarf, you can do whatever you want. In private, you can do whatever you want. France is fighting radical Islam. But now, if you ask me if Muslim people in France feel that that these laws are directed at them, I will tell you yes, because they think that these laws that are coming is directed at the Muslim women, because the French people, especially French women, don't want people to wear scarf. And if you ask the government is Islamophobia, I would say yes and no. In general, in the French constitution, you cannot direct a law to a religion or to a certain kind of people, but those other religions are suffering the same constraints that the Muslims are suffering now in France.
Monia, that's a good point, isn't it? That this is a slippery slope. And as you correctly pointed out, Monia, that the Christian community, for example, in France is supporting the Muslims. And I imagine other minorities must be as well, because I would think everybody sees what is happening, right? So, I mean, it starts, for example, with the Muslims, but then very soon it will begin targeting other people as well.
So other communities will obviously be targeted as well. A lot of our fundamental rights are in danger because of this law. Our right to create an organization. Some organizations, some charities were shut down. Homeschooling as well is being questioned because Emmanuel Macron said that it was that most of the time it was about Muslim families who chose to have their kids and to teach them at home, which is absolutely not true. A lot of families choose to have their kids at home and to teach them at home, and this is being questioned as well. So it's not about just Muslims. That's why a lot of people support us against this bill. It is actually flouting a lot of our fundamental rights.
So, Kourosh, when we're going forward right now, and undeniably at this point, we do have a clash, right, between French society as well as Muslims as well and other minorities. We've had, of course, issues of racism towards the black community as well, vis-a-vis police brutality and police targeting of that. Why do you think it is that even in the year 2021, for example, we're still having these sorts of issues of race and faith, etc., in French society? I mean, you would have thought that by now we would have moved beyond this.
I would say I might just have some disagreement here with you. It's we have a lot of issues in France. We have a lot of issues. Maybe black people feel that the French society is racist. Muslim people think the same. Jewish people think that the French society is the same. What these people are let me be clear, those fundamental or radicals don't understand. It's the situation of France, that France says if you're a Christian, if you work in an administration, you cannot wear the cross. If you're a Muslim, you cannot wear the scarf. If you're a Jewish, you cannot wear the kippah. And about homeschooling, you know that homeschooling instruction is mandatory in France, but not schooling. So you can keep your children at home and teach them whatever you want. So what the problem is here is we have a lot of Muslim and Jewish people that keep their children at home. They teaching them, instead of teaching them the French values, they try to teach them more the religious value. We have another problem with financing of the mosques. What the French government wants is have the French Muslim community to be sponsored and financed by the French government or the French people, and not by countries like Morocco, Algeria, or Turkey. And you have this imam or the preacher that are sent here to France, which preaches in Arabic, and they don't even speak French. So what I mean, I think what President Macron wants and what France wants is fighting radical Islam and not Islam, because I can say I'm a Muslim myself here in France, and I don't see many issues with me because I respect the law of this country. So if I have to choose between my Muslim right or my French right, I have to choose the French right, because in a laic country, the French law prevail over a religious law. And just to add one thing, you know, all this law is coming from the decapitation of that teacher Samuel Paty, which that schoolgirl who told her father that Samuel Paty was showing the pictures of the prophet. She just admitted that she lied about that, and this when her father took it to the internet, it went viral. A radical came on the internet, gave the name of that teacher where he was working, and this little lie led to the decapitation of someone, and French people were outraged by that, and the French government also. That's why they want to put this law in place.
Okay, so Monia, as Kourosh correctly pointed out, this entire issue about Paty, that was initially a lie. That student that came out, of course, and that wasn't very positive news in the sense that the entire. And of course, there's no justification for violence of that sort, but I'm saying that the entire thought pattern and narrative about that issue falls apart, right? How does the Muslim community then ensure that its place within French society, as well as, of course, ensuring that the narrative remains correct, that it's able to have a place within society, as well as respect the laws of the land?
There have been Muslims here for decades now, almost a century. We live here peacefully. All we want is to be respected and treated just like everybody else, not like second-class citizens. Of course, we respect the laws. We already respect the laws of this country. There are more than 6 million Muslims here, and if we were all dangerous terrorists, then the country would be in chaos. So it's preposterous. It's ridiculous. There is no Muslim problem, and Islam is not a problem here. Definitely, there is a problem with radicalization, and some disoriented people get involved into terrorist attacks, and we condemn that. We are victims of that, and of course we don't support that. But if France wants to prevent radicalization, it's not by shutting down mosques or charities or schools, which they are doing. According to us, this is the wrong answer. If France wants to fight radicalism, radical Islam, and terrorism, they need to do it with us, not against us, not by voting a law which is actually flouting our rights.
All right, I'll have to leave those a final comment, but we appreciate both Monia and Kourosh for taking their time out and speaking to us respectively from Lyon and Paris, sharing their thoughts with us about these NGOs and the letter that they've sent to the European Commission President, calling for France to be investigated by the European Court of Justice for what they have called, again, as I said in my introduction, state-sponsored Islamophobia. We have their two opposing points of view, both from Muslim points of view. Kourosh saying that within French society he feels fine, but then Monia discussing about the difficulties that the Muslims have, and certainly that again goes to show that the variety of opinions within Muslims in France itself. But beyond the fact, of course, if you're looking just at the facts on the ground regarding how France has dealt with its Muslim citizens recently, it certainly doesn't give one much confidence about the direction that the country is headed in vis-a-vis its relations with its own Muslim citizens, as well as others, be they black or other minorities also. I mean, everyone seems to be in the crosshairs at this point, or will be very soon if we continue down this trajectory. It is a question, yes, of course, of narratives as well, and as Monia there mentioned, extremism is not part of Islam, and it cannot be labeled and attached to all Muslims, as a lot of Muslims themselves, as we know around the world, are in fact the primary targets of such extremists as well. I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, in this segment, we're going to discuss a report that has come out by the Muslim Council of Britain. And it covers significant amounts of information when it comes to public sphere and how Muslims are viewed within the public sphere in the UK. And I'm going to hone in on employment and the workforce more specifically, as did this report as well in many in certain areas, of course. And it speaks about how with English-sounding names, you have 3 times the chance of getting more interviews than applicants with, for example, Muslim names. That I would imagine that, of course, goes for several other minorities as well in the UK. Now, applicants from minority ethnic backgrounds send 80% more applications to get positive responses from employers than people of white British origin, and then goes on to talk about specifically Muslim men and women, respectively, as having 76% or 65% less likelihood of being employed than their white Christian counterparts. As I said, of course, this is not something that is just limited to the Muslim population in the UK, but this report does speak about that. So I'm going to put that to our panelists who are joining us now. We're joined now by Dr. Abida Malik, who is an associate at the University of Nottingham. She teaches Understanding Contemporary Society. She's joining us today from Nottingham. Joining us today from London is Dr. Amina, Yaqin, who is a reader in post-colonial studies and Urdu. She's the chair of the Center for Study of Pakistan, as well as the chair of Decolonizing Working Group, and is the director of the SOAS Festival of Ideas. Amina and Abida, thank you both for taking your time out of your schedules to join us today here in Scope. Amina, let me start with you, if I may. If the workforce is this discriminatory, what chances, or let me put it this way, how does this hold back from Muslims from properly, if the word is even right to say, integrating into society?
Okay. Thanks very much, Waqar, for having me on the program. And I think I'll connect it to the report in terms of the work that I've myself also done on Muslim representation and connecting with how Muslims are considered and perceived in British society, which then is the question you're asking is a structural one about how does this impact employment in terms of why are people with Muslim sounding names not getting the same level of access to jobs. And it connects, you talked about African and Asian communities, which cuts across the Muslim community, which is a very wide-ranging community in the UK. You've got from Somalis to Pakistanis. You've got a history of racialization that is pre-9/11 as well, which after 9/11 and 7/7 and those kind of turning points become connected to this Islamophobic response that has been noted and defined by the Muslim Council of Britain's report. And I think it just means that the way that recognition through citizenship and identity politics, which is reflected in the media, which is reflected in civil society, which is reflected in the police service, all those things have an impact in how those citizens are viewed as part of society. And we've seen in recent reports that there was the Hope Not Hate poll where 40% of the ruling Conservative Party members saw Islam as a threat to the UK, and 50% had negative attitudes towards Muslims. So if you've got those kinds of attitudes that are part of the ruling Conservative Party, and then you've also got within the Labour Party elements of attitudes that have been noted with regards to the experience of
Islamophobia, and then you've got the appointment of the the Equalities Human Rights Commission chair, who has direct connections to the Henry Jackson Society think tank, who've received, £80,000 funding from 2015 to 2017, as noted in the report, when Michael Gove was the director of the group. And then, and there are links also with other groups like Quilliam and, Majid Nawaz's association with it. Yeah. So there's a kind of identity politics also that is being played within Britain with regards to how you think about how we think about Muslims within this community. So the politics of populism, which is also not just specific to Britain, that's been part of Trump's politics. Indeed. It's part of Modi's politics.
Yes, if you allow me, Amina, I wanted to pick up on a couple of the points you made there, and if you allow me, I wanted to put that to Abida as well. Abida, Amina there went through quite a few very pertinent points, and I wanted to get your thoughts on those as well. I mean, identity politics in the context of course, just within the public sphere and Muslims' place within that or lack of. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So just bringing it back to the report, I think we can note that the Runnymede Trust did a report in the early 1990s and then in 2018 confirming that Islamophobia is still a challenge for us all. So the MCB report affirms this and confirms that the representation of Muslims within a workplace environment has also been a continual issue. As we know, there is diaspora of Muslims and they're plural and they're diverse, but within that they face many challenges. So at the Bridge Institute, we did a report which was looking at the racialization of Muslim-sounding names. So if you had a Muslim-sounding name, you were less likely to get a job. And then we know at universities, various Muslim students pointed out inequalities and inequity that they had experienced. But interestingly, there were more female students going to university and continuing on. So Muslim British women were actually excelling within the university setting, but when it got to actually acquiring and getting a job, this is where they were hitting the glass ceiling. The Women's Inequalities Committee report says this idea of triple penalty, and this is specifically on Muslims in employment. And this is talking about Muslim women. So if you're BME, you're Muslim and you're a woman, you're less likely and you're facing this triple penalty and less likely to be able to acquire work. I think this idea of identity politics is key here also. So with the Telmama statistics and those that are self-reporting about the types of Islamophobia they face, we'll see a huge increase being published by those who are visibly Muslim, and specifically women being targeted as a result. So we're aware that there are, cultural, social, and institutional issues in terms of racialization, which continues to happen, both of names but also of identities. And then this is something that needs to be challenged. I think one of the ways that this is being challenged and how Islamophobia is overcome is that Muslims, by naturally, from being based in their faith, are motivated to overcome kind of negativities through faith-based action. So you see the APPG, they released a report about Muslim contributions during the COVID pandemic. Yeah. And you'll see the huge contributions within NHS healthcare services through to civic work, where feeding and distributing food parcels has been huge. So I think Muslims are present and they're involved and they're engaging. At the same time, they face this discrimination and racism and racialization, but then they are doing what they can in terms of trying to encounter and tackle these issues.
Amina, as somebody who was an immigrant myself, respectively in Canada, of course, not in the UK context, but even in a place like Canada where there is a quote-unquote multicultural society, we have a lot of people who are even Muslims who do sometimes change their names, or at least their first names, in order to be able to get work more easily, especially if they're working in sales or such more public roles. Is this then something, do you think, that is a lot more widespread, in the sense that even within societies, and of course we know that the Muslim community within the UK is very, very well established, has been there for a very long time, regardless of which ethnicity you speak about, be it the South Asians or Arabs or otherwise. Is that something that is still the society faces, or do you think we're moving beyond that?
I think that's an interesting question to think about in terms of Mohammed, in terms of naming. That's been one of the most popular names in the UK, and it taps into that prejudice that is also noted in the report about Muslims taking over in terms of population. How do you counter that kind of recognition? And I think one of the things that I thought was quite interesting in the report, and it's got worse. I think it's not got better, which is why the consultation that has taken place with the APPG and the whole sort of work that has gone into the construction of this report, and the fact that the Muslim Council of Britain themselves have had to establish themselves within the kind of political party system and how it works is all connected to that question that you're asking, which is about the systemic, institutional, interpersonal, and sort of all those kind of things that are listed in the report as well, and the history of. And it's really interesting to think about that question in relation to the history of anti-racism, and then the context of the law and civil society, especially with regards to the police and institutional racism. So in terms of how the stop and search connects with Islamophobia, those are and kind of Muslim masculinity and terrorism charges, as well as grooming gangs. Those are all identifications. Some of them connect with problems that are present within Muslim communities as well. But these are not, the things that are that then identify everybody who is Muslim within Britain. And I think it's that distinction that people have to be educated about, and that people have to learn about. And in the media recently, it's been highlighted with the recent interview with Meghan Markle, in fact, how the tabloid press plays such a huge role in determining what the perceptions and prejudices are in British society, and how people, are in a sense being played by that whole game. And the tabloid press have played a huge role in how Muslims are demonized, and the Islamophobia contexts, from kind of halal pizzas being, I'm going back to an old example of being something that is kind of contaminating society in ways that we don't know. So that and then within universities and students, as was mentioned before, the other thing that I haven't talked about is the prevent legislation, which is making young Muslims feel that they're not part of this society, that kind of recognition that is being the policing, the safeguarding, all kind of things about how the state is looking after you because you're not able to look after yourself. Your parents are not to be trusted. You are not to be trusted. Those kind of very intrinsic issues of trust and social trust, and all those things kind of come into play. So I think the prevent context, which is talked about, mentioned a little bit in the report. It's not taken up a lot, but I know in the university that's been a huge issue with regards to.
I do apologize for coming in once again, Amina. Unfortunately, the clock is getting the best of us, so I wanted to give Abida the final word. Abida, on that point of young people, as Amina there brought up, this, again, it makes for depressing reading, but I wonder, as you said, of course, Muslims are, as with, I imagine, other ethnicities in the UK and other faith groups as well, who may be, stereotyped negatively in any ways when it comes by employers. They are working to break down these barriers. But what more can be done at this point? Who needs to act at this time? Because obviously the victimhood mentality is not healthy either. So how does one then move beyond this?
I think there needs to be key structural changes. One of the things that we're noting now is a slight return back to the 1980s politics. I hear you mention multiculturalism. Within the UK, it's been debated and contested that multiculturalism is dead, and a more move towards community cohesion, for example, and this idea of big society. What's happening now is many groups are coming together of all different faith backgrounds, and that diversity is unifying people. So what we see off the back of Black Lives Matter, and people came together outraged by what had happened within America, but constantly what happens in the context of the UK as well, that we accept and acknowledge racism is a key issue. So what we have now is lots of faith-based, also those that are from different ethnicities coming together to try to tackle these issues of racism and discrimination, which is key and really important. What you have as well is faith communities becoming more involved in civil society and knowing how to address various issues. So the issue of media representation, the Centre for Media Monitoring, which was a kind of supported by the MCB, was set up to actually look and acknowledge all the reporting and inaccurate reporting of Muslims within the UK, and a way to address various forms of racism. Now, I strongly believe that youth is definitely the way forward in terms of making changes. Even I've worked with people close that have young surgeons. One that I know very well, Farah, she set up a surgical hijab within a Derby Trust as a basis of a paper that was done through BIMA. And through that are making changes and are working together towards shared goals and visions of diverse communities working together.
Very well. We'll have to leave it there at that, but we do sincerely appreciate Abida and Amina for sharing their expertise with us. This is an extremely important topic, isn't it? As both Amina and Abida shed light on for us. You know, there are aspects to this, right? So we're speaking about the role of Muslims within the public sphere, but it's not just Muslims certainly who are being targeted. But if you're looking at the statistics as the MCB, the Muslim Council of Britain, has laid out, I mean, 76%, 65% respectively less chances for Muslim men and women to be employed versus their white Christian counterparts. That's a troubling, and those are troubling statistics, aren't they? Where if Muslims are meant to be integrating society, where, you know, that's continuously, seemingly, at least on the part of the right wing, the demand, how are they meant to do that if they're not allowed into the workforce altogether? But on the other hand, as Abida also laid out, these faith groups all need to act together. So those who are being targeted or stereotyped, in fact, in this fashion, need to work together to overcome this. Muslims, as with other ethnicities in the UK, a lot of them are successful, even beyond these sorts of obstacles that are put in a path. But to have these obstacles in 2021 in the path of anybody who is seeking to enter the workforce just defies logic, especially in such multicultural societies, which of course claim that they are accepting of people of all faiths, colors, creeds, etc. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.